Hey Gators, it's Miss Jackson with a new First Chapter Friday. Today's book is Hardscrabble by Sandra Dallas, and this is one of this year's Bob books. I hope you enjoy it. Hardscrabble by Sandra Dallas. Chapter 1, Coming to Colorado. "Where's Papa?" Belle Martin asked, looking around the train station. Carrie shook her head. "Hush," she whispered. Belle frowned. Was Carrie suggesting that if she hadn't asked about Papa, Mama wouldn't have noticed he wasn't there to meet them? Belle searched the depot, hoping to spot her father. Perhaps he was lost in the crowd of people milling about. She saw men removing farm equipment that had come in on the train and putting it onto wagons. A boy helped his father lift bags of seeds out of one of the cars and stack them on the depot platform. A woman wearing a worn shawl over her head tried to hold on to half a dozen children, talking to them in a language that Belle didn't understand. Carrie had told her they were immigrants, people who had come to America from other countries hoping for a better life. They expected to farm in Colorado. Women got off the train and stood on the metal platform and searched the crowd for their husbands, and then smiled when they found them. Belle watched one woman as she hugged a man. As his face turned red, he removed her arms, but she would have none of it. "6 months since I've seen you, and I've the right to a little affection," she said. But there was no Papa. One by one, as their husbands claimed them, the women left the platform, a few getting into automobiles or trucks, but most into wagons. The immigrants, too, crowded into rickety wagons and drove off across the brown prairie, leaving only the Martins. A few people glanced at Mama, who looked frail and sick, and leaned against Carrie for support. But they didn't ask what was wrong or offer to help. And nobody paid attention to Belle, who stood at the edge of the rough boards, holding the hands of 2 little girls, Sarah, age 4, and Becky, age 2. Belle's brother, Frank, 11, sat on one of their trunks with another brother, Gully, 5. Beside them were boxes and barrels of dishes and pots and pans and sacks of flour and sugar. There were containers of salt and spices and dozens of other items. Mama thought they would need on a farm. "We haven't seen Papa for 6 months either. Where is he? Belle, is he coming?" Frank asked. "He'll be here. He expects us. He promised to meet us." And then she added, "Maybe he got the day wrong. This is June 11th, 1910, isn't it? And this is Mingo, Colorado, isn't it?" Frank shrugged in a "how would I know" gesture. Belle tried not to think of the conversation she had overheard on the train. A man had been talking about a woman who arrived in Mingo just a week earlier to meet her husband, only to discover he wasn't there at all. He was supposed to have left the East to file for a homestead near Mingo, but instead he had taken their money and run off. So there she was, no husband, and not enough money to buy a ticket back to where she had come from. Belle half expected to see the woman standing on the platform still, but of course she was gone. The Martins, too, didn't have the money for return tickets to Iowa. That was why they had come here, because their money was gone. But she wasn't worried. Papa wasn't like that man. He loved them. He had written home that he was counting the days until his family joined him. She glanced at her big sister. Carrie was 15, 3 years older than Belle, 4 years older than Frank. Carrie held tight to Mama, who was holding the baby in her arms. The baby was only 6 weeks old and didn't have a name. Mama said she'd wait until they got to Colorado so that Papa could name him. Mama had felt poorly even before the baby came. The doctor had told her she was not to go to Colorado until he was born. And then after the baby arrived, the doctor had wanted her to stay in Iowa for a few more months before moving to Mingo. She still wasn't well, but Mama had insisted she'd be fine as soon as she saw Papa. The sight of him would be better than any rest or medicine, she claimed. Mama didn't seem worried that Papa hadn't met them, but Belle could tell that Carrie was. Carrie led Mama to a bench and told her to rest. Mama nodded and sat down, the baby in her lap. And then Carrie went to Belle. She had forgotten she'd told Belle to hush, and she whispered, "I don't understand where Papa is. He ought to be here. It's not right, his making Mama wait." "He's coming," Belle said. "You always worry." She was right. Sometimes Carrie acted like a grown-up. She fussed over Mama, and she often did the cooking and washing and caring for the baby when Mama was tired. "He'll be here," Belle said stubbornly. She looked out across the prairie. The grasses, gold in the late afternoon sun, waved in the wind that blew dust and dirt onto the platform. There wasn't a tree to block the view. There wasn't a sign of Papa either. "I don't think Mingo's what Mama expected it to be," Carrie said. "She told me there'd be crops and flowers, that it would be green. I've never seen so much brown. It's ugly." Carrie glanced at her mother, who sat softly humming to the baby. Belle stared at her sister for a moment. Although she sometimes brooded, Carrie, like her mother, rarely complained. When trouble came, Carrie would press her lips together and then smile and say, "Things could be worse." "Well," she said, smiling now at Belle, "I think this farm will be a fine one. Different from Iowa, but Papa's a good farmer and it looks like he won't have to cut down trees." She gave a laugh. "We won't have a mortgage either." Still, she said, "I hope the house Papa built for us will be better than the dirt huts and tar paper shacks we saw along the train tracks. I wouldn't want Mama to live in something like that." Belle agreed. They had had a nice home in Iowa, a brick house with white jigsaw trim hanging from the roof. The house was big with 4 bedrooms, and there was running water in the kitchen and an indoor bathroom. But the crops had failed over the last 3 years, and the bank took away the farm. And then Mama was sick long before the baby came. The doctor said she needed a change of climate. He told Papa to take her west, where the air was clear and dry. So Papa decided to try his hand at homesteading. The government promised to give a man 320 acres of land for free. All he had to do was live on it for 5 years and farm it. That sounded like a fine opportunity. So Papa set off for Mingo to file for a homestead, leaving his family to follow later. Belle looked out across the high plains once more. She believed she could almost see the earth curve. She learned at school that the earth was a giant ball. A dusty ball in Colorado, she thought, as she watched far off on the horizon as tumbleweeds rolled across the plains. The conductor on the train had pointed out the weeds to them, saying they were Russian thistles, but everybody called them tumbleweeds because of the way the wind sent them tumbling across the fields. She stared in that direction for a long time, and then she grabbed Frank's arm, excited. "Look, I think there's a wagon." "Papa?" Carrie said. She went to Mama and took her arm. "See over there, a wagon. It has to be Papa. We knew he'd come." "Of course we did," Mama replied, looking around as if she hadn't realized her children were worried. "I never doubted it for a minute." The wagon moved quickly across the open ground, and in a few minutes it was at the depot. Papa jumped out and landed on the platform with a bound. He grabbed Mama in his arms and hugged her. "I'd have been here sooner, but the wheel on the wagon broke just as I was leaving, and I had to go to the neighbor's to borrow his wagon." "We knew there was a reason," Mama said, beaming at him. "But what does it matter? You're here now, Beck." Papa hugged her again and then turned to the others. "Carrie, what would your mother have done without you? And my little Bluebell, sassy as ever." He hugged both his older daughters and then shook hands with Frank, telling him he was glad there was another man now to help with the farm. He shook hands with Gully, too, and then he picked up Sarah and Becky, one girl in each arm, and said they had grown so much he wouldn't have known them. "Why, last time I saw you, Becky, you couldn't even walk." Becky stared and then asked, "Are you Papa?" "Of course I am. I'll never stay away from you this long again." At last he went back to Mama and peered down at the baby. "Why, who's this button here? I believe you've added another little Martin to our family. He certainly seems to be a Martin. Just look at those ears." The baby's ears stuck out just like Papa's and Frank's. "What do you call him?" "Baby," Carrie put in. "Mama says you're to name him, just like you did all of us." Papa nodded. He had named Carrie and Frank after his parents. Belle was supposed to be named for Mama's mother, but when he saw her bright blue eyes, Papa said they were the color of bluebells, and so he'd called her Bluebell. Sarah and Gully were named after Mama's folks, and Becky after himself. "What name do you favor for this little one, Louisa?" he asked Mama. "He should be called something for our new home, but I don't see any bluebells out here," Mama said. "There's buffalo grass, but that's not much of a name for a boy." Papa thought for a moment, and then he reached for the baby, who was so small that Papa could hold him in one hand. He peeled back the blanket and grinned at the infant. "What name would you like, young sir? What would you think of Louie? It's a good deal like your mother's name." He glanced over at Mama. "What do you think of it, Louisa?" "I never favored it," Mama told him. "He ought to have a Western name, a Colorado name." Papa looked out across the prairie and then turned to us and grinned. "What do you say to Sagebrush?" he asked. "First name will be Louie and middle name Sagebrush. We'll call him Sage." "Sage," Mama repeated. "I think that's a fine name." She took back the baby and told Papa, "Now it's time to take Sage to his new home. We're all of us tired out." Papa, Frank, and Belle loaded the trunks and bags and boxes of foodstuff into the wagon, and then Papa lifted Mama and the baby onto the board seat. The rest of the family climbed into the wagon bed, and they started out across the prairie. As the depot disappeared behind them, Frank said, "I like this place. I could ride a horse 100 miles out here. Do you think Papa will let me ride one of the horses, Belle?" "I do. I think he'll let me ride too, astride. And I'll be able to run foot races and wear short skirts and not have to worry about what people will think. Because there won't be anybody to see me," she said. "Don't you think Colorado's swell, Carrie?" Carrie had seated herself on one of the trunks, and she too stared out at the land. There was a look of shock on her face, and Belle wondered what her sister thought of the prairie. Like Mama, however, she would never complain. She would make the best of things. "Why, I like it fine," she replied. All right, that is the end of chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. I really, really love this book. It reminds me of a show that I used to watch as a little girl called Little House on the Prairie. So if any of you know that or are familiar with the Little House books, I think you will really enjoy Hardscrabble by Sandra Dallas.